Welcome to Hub City. We're going to talk about NXT from July the 15th, 2025. Saw a tweet earlier that made me very interested. There was a question. Has NXT lost its identity now because of LFG, Evolve, and TNA now being featured on NXT? And I thought it was an interesting question because this show had had everything. You know, it had LFG, it had TNA. But here's the thing about NXT. It's a brand that encompasses pretty much everything WWE. It's ultimately the salad of WWE. Like, it's not a melting pot. And I credit Maj Toure with this idea because he said, like, America is not a melting pot, it's a salad. In a melting pot, everything blends together. You know, that's like a soup, right? You don't want to have a soup. Now, America's more like a salad. Everything goes together, but it is what it is. Tomatoes are tomatoes. Lettuce is lettuce. Carrots are carrots, etc. You know? You just put them all together and they work in one bowl. NXT is essentially the same way. Like, the TNA storylines feature the TNA wrestlers. The LFG storyline features the LFG wrestlers. The Evolve storylines feature the Evolve talent, and the NXT talent interact with each other, but they also interact with everybody else too. As long as everything is perfectly coordinated and organized, then it's fine. What's the difference, however, between NXT and, let's say, AEW around Forbidden Door time? Now, this is a major thing here. As I say, this is the weak part of being a hub or a salad, is if other people don't watch the product. When AEW does stuff like Forbidden Door, usually their fans are familiar with New Japan and CMLL, etc., but the overall population is not. So most of the people who are watching the show has no idea who Hechicero is, has no idea what all of this stuff going on is, and it's rarely really storyline driven. In WWE, it's more like big matches that are going to be coming up later or something like that. In WWE, with the TNA storyline, with the LFG stuff, and a little bit with the Evolve stuff, is usually a storyline reason why these things are occurring. Even if it's just a promo segment backstage, it's usually something character related and story related that's happening on the show. And I'm going to explain that as I go through this review, because I want to show the difference between NXT being a hub of TNA and LFG and all that sort of stuff, and what's the difference between that and what AEW does on, like, Forbidden Door. We started the show with JC Jane. We started and closed the show with Fatal Influence. JC Jane blamed Fallon Henley for the loss at the Great American Bash and at TNA, and that Jasmine Nix's best wasn't good enough. But when they have her around, they're going to be fine in Fatal Influence. And she said they redeemed themselves at Evolution. And she said she's going to do what no one else has ever done, that's become a double champion. This brings out Masha Slamovich, who doesn't have a working microphone. Masha Slamovich clearly is the TNA Knockouts champion. This is only the second time she's been on this show. This is the first time she's been mentioned by name on the first time she's been given a microphone and an ability to talk on the show. The last time she was on this show, I think, was last week, when all she did was show up and beat up some people. I think she showed up at the Great American Bash too, I don't remember. Anyway, she says that JC Jane only defeated Jordan Grace because it was a 4-on-1 situation, and that Sunday at Slammiversary she is going to beat her. So Ruka shows up and says she's got 2 belts already, the North American title and the Speed title. And because now they're actually talking about the Speed division. There was a while there, like when Candice LeRae was the champion, and I think when there was a men's Speed champion like Ricochet, they weren't mentioning the Speed championship. But now that Sol Ruka has it, they're mentioning the Speed championship on NXT TV. They're not having speed matches, which they should. They should, but they're not doing it yet. But they're mentioning that she's a speed champion because they want to use it to push Sol Ruca. I don't even know who the men's speed champion is. I have no idea. It's never mentioned on WWE TV. Anyway, Sol Ruca already has 2 championships, so she's already done exactly what JC Jane claiming that she wants to do. And then Zarya called Sol Ruca the MVP of the weekend, having 3 matches in a row. Fatal Influence mocked that Zarya and Sol Ruca keep having these accidents where they hit each other. This led to a big brawl in the ring between all 6 of them, and that was indeed our main event. The 6-woman tag team match, Masha Slamovich, Zarya, and Sol Ruca versus Fatal Influence. Now, before this match, Tatum Paxley was hiding backstage. She was hiding from Izzy Dane. She wanted to get away from Izzy Dane because she had caused Izzy to lose at Great American Bash, and she was ashamed of herself. Izzy wasn't mad at her, however. She was upset with Sol Ruca because Sol Ruca took advantage of Paxley. So during this 6-man tag between these 6 women, Paxley and Izzy Dane appeared. They got the attention of Sol Ruca and Zarya. They started to fight, and they fought off. Now, they came with Sean Spears and Nico Vance, and then for some odd reason, Hank and Tank showed up as well. So all 8 of them disappeared. They just vanished. Masha Slamovich ended up winning the match anyway, as she pinned JC Jane with the Northern Lights Bomb, which is her finisher. So the big push on this show was to feature the TNA champion, Masha Slamovich, in a way that makes people believe that she can beat the NXT champion, JC Jane, and they did that in one night. Now, would have been nice if they gave Masha Slamovich more time on the show, but I think they did all the thing that they're going to do, because the championship match is now this Sunday. It's going to be Masha Slamovich versus JC Jane, championship versus championship. I'm now starting to think perhaps they will have JC Jane have 2 belts. I'm actually very excited about this because I'm a big fan of JC Jane. Always has been. I was a big supporter of hers in Toxic Attraction. I thought she was the weak link of that group. It turns out she wasn't. She's a much better wrestler than Gigi Dolan. She just hadn't gotten the opportunity to work a lot as a singles wrestler. She was treated a whole lot like Chelsea Green, where she was mostly comedy, and if she'll wrestle a match, it'll be 4 minutes and she'll lose. But now that she's getting longer matches, you can see how good she actually is and how much work she's put in. And she's grown quite a bit in her 4 years in NXT. She's been in NXT a long time. And she's actually starting to peak. Now, I don't know what they're going to do on the TNA show, but having Masha Slamovich pin JC Jane, almost a dead giveaway that they're going to end up putting JC over at Slammiversary. The tears of people who watch TNA, because there's still plenty of that. There's a lot of that, and that's a major issue when it comes to the crossover. Is because there was some TNA onlys who, they don't watch NXT, so they don't understand why this crossover is happening, why Trick Williams is the TNA champion, why the show has to be revolving around him, and TNA's making all of these changes, and they're doing a lot of stuff that's different from what they used to do. And I said this before. It was a whole thing with Marky D123, who was one of the few TNA YouTubers, and he's boycotting TNA because of the NXT crossover. But TNA is growing. They're opening up more seats for Slammiversary as we speak. They're selling more tickets. Carlos Silva is out doing interviews with Ariel Helwani. These were things that were unheard of 4 or 5 years ago. Now, he did throw Gail Kim under the bus. We're going to talk about more of that probably during the TNA Slammiversary, either preview or review, one or the other. But there was an issue with Carlos Silva, made some comments about Scott D'Amore and Gail Kim in the Knockouts division and that sort of stuff. Suffice it to say, they were not thrilled with Gail Kim and Scott D'Amore and how they were using the division. And I guess, like I said, we'll get more into that later. But a lot of people who were TNA onlys, they don't understand that TNA has been stagnant and damn near dead for years. They just think, oh, we just love our TNA without realizing it's a business and it has to make money. And this partnership is really lifting TNA because TNA is not really doing a good job of lifting itself. And I think that's been the negative, if there is a negative to this crossover, is that TNA has become a little bit too dependent on NXT. Now, in the first match featuring the men, Mike Santana, Trick Williams, and Joe Hendry fought the Dark State to a disqualification. Now, the Dark State has been featured on TNA. They have been attacking people on TNA. Of course, they've been attacking people on NXT as well. This match ended in disqualification because the system, that would be Moose, Brian Myers, and Eddie Edwards, they charged the ring and attacked the Dark State because they have issues with the Dark State on the TNA show. Now, of course, everybody's like, if you didn't watch TNA, why is this happening? Like at least Santana and Trick Williams have been on this show. I don't know why they were at Great American Bash. That was a waste of everybody's time and energy. And the system sucks. They suck real bad. But they're furthering TNA storylines. So this first hour or so was about boosting the partnership. Right? This is what they're doing in this part. They want to help sell some tickets and sell some purchases, some buys for Slammiversary. So they dedicated really the first 2 segments of NXT to it. This match didn't actually go on very long. And considering Trick Williams and Joe Hendry and Mike Santana are opponents at Slammiversary, I didn't expect much out of this anyway. Besides, the Dark State has not lost yet. So they're probably saving that loss for something else. And I think Dark State will be wrestling for no, they're not wrestling for the TNA Tag Team Championships. I don't think so. I don't remember what the hell they're doing on TNA. If we're being honest, I forgot. But they've been featured on TNA. That is why the system are there. All right, so we go from there to the Evolve element. Because Kylie Armstrong, the Evolve Women's Champion, she's fresh off of having a match with Natalya on Evolve because Everybody is Everywhere. The NXT Extended Universe includes Evolve. And since it's part of the WWE overall universe, Natalya can go to Evolve. And Natalya worked the match with this Kylie Armstrong, who everybody sees as sort of the baby of Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair. And she's a decent wrestler. She's clearly not NXT ready yet, but she's almost there. And Evolve is a good place for all the runoff. All the people who are decent wrestlers, but they still need a higher level of development, Evolve is good for them. Like, it's developmental, but it's lower level developmental. Like, it's like ancient Egypt, where it's like an upper chamber and a lower chamber. And Evolve is the lower chamber. And NXT would be like the upper chamber, right? So you basically work yourself out of Evolve into NXT. And Kylie Armstrong is the champion of the women down there. And so she's going to get an opportunity to wrestle with NXT talent. She gets into an argument with Carmen Petrovic, who is a good edge case, where sometimes Carmen Petrovic has wrestled on Evolve before. So it's not completely out of the ordinary that Carmen Petrovic would be an opponent wrestling for the Evolve Women's title. And this ends up happening because they get into an argument about how none of them were in the Battle Royal and who would have won, who would have done better. It's kind of dumb, really. But anyway, Kylie Armstrong is wrestling Carmen Petrovic. They do a little something in there. It's just enough to show Kylie Armstrong off. She get a really dope power slam. And then Jordynne Grace comes in and beats them both up. Okay, so this sets up things for the future for Jordynne Grace to wrestle Kylie Armstrong in the future, or Carmen Petrovic, one or the other, depending on what's necessary or what's needed at the time. Then Jordynne Grace calls out Mariah May. She wants to know why Mariah did what she did. Instead, we get a video package because Mariah is not there. And the video package says that Jordynne Grace is not worthy to carry Mariah's shoes, let alone the Women's Championship of NXT, and that Mariah May plans to have her debut next week, where she's going to show Jordynne Grace the difference between her and Mariah May. So Mariah May is there, and she sent this video in, and Jordynne Grace is talking to Stevie Turner, who is the general manager of Evolve, and Mr. Stone, who has been floating around Evolve. He's also been floating around a lot in TNA. So you got that sort of stuff. I don't think he's been in TNA as much anymore, but he was floating around in TNA for a while. So Jordynne Grace beat both of them up. She beat up Stevie Turner and Mr. Stone. We found out later that Ren Sinclair is going to end up being Mariah May's first opponent, because NXT is going to be on the road, Jack. They're going to be in Houston. And I hadn't heard anything about this. I don't know how many tickets they've sold. I have no idea what's going on. I guess I'll have to take a look for next week. But NXT is going to be on the road next week, so they really wanted to put their best foot forward. So one of the things they're going to do is to have Mariah May's in-ring debut. Now, having Jordynne Grace beat up some authority figures, like these guys are assistants for Ava, Stevie Turner, and Mr. Stone. So I could see them maybe suspending Jordynne Grace for a week or something like that in order to keep her away so that Mariah May can have her match unmolested. I keep calling her Mariah May because I don't like that name, Blake Monroe. But I could, again, this is consistent. They've been building this for a while. Then we get the LFG element, because this is something weird. So Undertaker's team for LFG, they're just hanging around backstage in NXT. They bump into Trick Williams, or Trick Williams bumps into them. He tells them to move. Nobody moves. And then he cuts into them about, being disrespectful and this is his yard and all this sort of stuff. Basically daring one of them to jump at him. Nobody does anything. And then Undertaker calls them on the phone. And then we find out that Undertaker's going to make an appearance next week on NXT. He's going to confront Trick Williams. Trick Williams disrespected his youngins, his fledglings, and he's going to stand up to Trick Williams for being a bully. It's still his yard, and they're going to be in Houston, so they're just trying to sell tickets for Houston. But this is the LFG element. I don't know who these people are because I don't watch LFG. I really don't. So this is all I needed to know is they're part of Undertaker's team, and they're going to be the reason he's going to be there next week. So they need to have an excuse to have Undertaker on the show next week. So they manufactured an excuse, and that is Trick Williams' ego is out of control, and he's threatening to beat up Undertaker's team on LFG, and now he's going to show up, to maybe, hopefully, chokeslam Trick Williams. It ought to be pretty cool to have a Undertaker Trick Williams segment on TV. That's going to fucking rule ass, regardless of what happens. Whether TNA champion or not, Trick Williams is going to have a segment with Undertaker next week. That's going to kick ass. But this was the only thing they really did from the LFG show. Now, they have been mostly sending people who are on LFG, they've been sending them to Evolve, because that's where Tyra May Steele ended up going. That's where the other young lady, Jen Tala, ended up going. They both ended up just getting sent to Evolve. Now, it was an issue because Tyra May Steele, who was the female, I forgot her name again. She was the Olympic gold medalist from like 4 or 5 years ago. She's been training for a long time. She was in NXT, then she got sent to LFG. Then she, I think, won LFG, or she was one of the winners or something. She got an NXT contract. She had one match on NXT. They shipped her ass to Evolve. So now she's on Evolve. And then the other young lady, Jen Tala, she's the Asian lady who has she has like a level of charisma, and everybody likes her. She didn't win LFG, but she's been sent to Evolve as well. So, again, lower levels of development. They're sending people around. But it's interesting how they're deciding to use the LFG talent here and the Evolve talent, because as we've seen in the past couple of weeks, the Vanity Project was hanging out with Ethan Page. And this is important because Ethan Page is going to have some kind of celebration in Houston next week. And I fully expect the Vanity Project to be there with him, because they have been sort of coalesced around him when they come to NXT. And they were on NXT last week in the big gauntlet against Ricky Starks. So again, these things are overlapping, but they're making sense, as individuals are in storylines with each other, or these individuals are involved with something that involves NXT. Now, Jasper Troy, who was also on LFG, but he graduated from that show, he's pretty much an NXT talent now. He, of course, has been getting a huge push, even though he's done nothing but lose. He's done nothing but lose to like the main stars of NXT. He was chastised by Ava for attacking Ricky Starks during the Falls Count Anywhere match at the Great American Bash. Jasper Troy said, Ricky Starks was in his territory, got what he had coming. So Ava made a match between the two of them next week. And Ricky Starks says he's going to prove he is what he says he is next week against this guy. Now we got ourselves an NXT storyline, the explosion of the D'Angelo family, the triple threat match between Channing Stacks Lorenzo, or just Stacks, versus Luca Crucifino versus Tony D'Angelo. Easily the match of the night. It was very good. And it told a decent story. And I like that they're showing the vignettes all night. They've been really heavy with the vignettes for the D'Angelo family as they wrapped up this storyline. I wish this was the main event, but they put it on. There's only 4 matches on the show, and this was the third one, so it was the co-main event, I guess. But I wish it was the main event, because the D'Angelo family is a 3-year story. I think it's a 3-year story in NXT. Anyway, Stacks was looking for the crowbar. He ended up finding it eventually, but it didn't do him any good. But it was funny that he went looking for it and he couldn't find it. Tony D'Angelo did a hip toss to Stacks outside the ring, and it basically bowls Luca Crucifino over. That was crazy. The finishing stretch, though, was major. Tony D'Angelo speared Stacks through the wall and then chucked him out the other side like Jazzy Jeff. That was amazing. And then he spine-bustered Luca Crucifino through the announce desk, went in the ring, spine-buster, Stacks, pinned him. So Tony D'Angelo, he won the family feud. We don't know whether this is the end of the dawn of NXT or if this is the next level of the dawn of NXT. We're not sure. But I'm thinking at this point that Tony D'Angelo is ready to be the champion of NXT. They did a really good job of making the other guys seem competitive. And then, obviously, when Tony D'Angelo, enough's enough, and he's putting these guys through walls, and he put them through tables and just beat them and just stomped out, just killed them. Just fucking crushed these guys. I love it. Thought it was great. Great finish there. Interested in what they do next with Tony D'Angelo. This feels like he should be in position to be the champion. He should be wrestling Obafemi in the future. Hopefully we get there. It's not crowded at the top. It is really not. So we got a whole lot of open space for him. Lash Legend says she's going to be meeting the new double champ next week, whether it's JC Jane or Masha Slamovich. Jada Parker plans to be there too, so they're already planning a feud between Lash Legend and Jada Parker. Interesting. Jada Parker's just been aloof for a while now. We'll get back on track, I'm sure, eventually. Ren Sinclair says she's never going to leave the No Quarter Cash crew, while Tavion Heights is disappointed that he had to stay because she threw in the towel. Now, Dempsey and Tavion Heights are still having issues because of the Tavion wants to leave and do his own thing. Similar to how Miles Bourne ended up leaving and does his own thing on NXT when he's on the show. He's not on the show enough. But like I said earlier, Ren Sinclair is going to end up being Mariah May's next opponent, or her first opponent. Now, the big segment, the major segment, Josh Briggs comes out and he's going to argue with Obafemi. This is not my favorite. I see where they're going with this. I actually see a pattern, and I'm going to talk about this. But I don't like Josh Briggs. So Josh Briggs said that Yoshiki Inamura didn't want to win as bad as Josh Briggs wanted him to win. And he says that Inamura got a championship match on a PLE. He's only in the company 1 year, while he has been here for 4 years and never gotten a title shot. Then he said this is a cutthroat business and Inamura is too nice. He won't do what's necessary to win. Obafemi got in his face and said that Josh Briggs ruined his match with Inamura based off jealousy, while Josh Briggs thinks that Obafemi's been pushed to his limit by everybody and that eventually he's going to break because nobody is invincible. At this point, Yoshiki Inamura comes out in his very bad English, says that Josh Briggs don't speak for him, he's his own man, and he's going to fight, and he fights with honor. After some more bickering, Josh Briggs challenged Obafemi to a triple threat match next week in Houston, to which Obafemi actually agreed, and I groaned. I do not want to. I hate triple threat matches, and they consistently force feed triple threat matches. My God. Anyway, so they're teasing a Josh Briggs Inamura feud, but here's the interesting bit. Josh Briggs came from Evolve at the same time that JC Jane came from Evolve. So they've been in there at the same damn time. Are they going to put the NXT championship on Josh Briggs as he's going to be the male JC Jane? Lord, I hope not. Lord, I hope not. But that's an interesting pattern that they're setting up here. Is that they're the last two major talents that came from the Evolve closing 4 or 5 years ago. They're the only two left. And they've been in NXT the entire time. It ought to be interesting. I certainly hope not. Hopefully, Obafemi beats these guys and we can get Obafemi versus Tony D'Angelo in our main events. Because that would rule. Also, it would be nice is if you're going to bring people in for these shows and try to blend everything together, send somebody from the main roster down too. You know, that ought to be nice. But overall, the NXT show was kind of bland. You know, the first 2 matches were disqualifications. A lot of this show was dedicated to building up next week and also building up Slammiversary. So there was not a lot of what's anything important happening right now. And that's a weak spot, you know, because there's a big show on the road next week. They want to put a lot of emphasis on that. And because TNA is a partner, they want to put a lot of emphasis on their pay-per-view as well. They kind of neglected this episode of NXT and just sort of made it connective tissue for the other show. So this particular episode of NXT definitely did suffer from all the crossovers because there was nothing focused on specifically NXT. But they did finish up the D'Angelo family storyline, which frees up all 3 of these guys. Now they're going to go their own way. They already put Luca Crucifino on Evolve. He was on Evolve from episode 1. All right. So he was already there. Tony D'Angelo gets to do something different, and Stax has the Heritage Cup, so he gets to do something different. And now we have 3 singles acts who could go on to do bigger and better things. I like Stax as an in-ring wrestler. I think he's tremendous. Hopefully he grows and becomes something major. Hopefully NXT smartens up and just realizes that Tony D'Angelo is a guy you need to put some emphasis on right now. And if you're in any way wavering in your support of Obafemi, which you shouldn't be because he is top shelf professional wrestling, then I would consider Tony D'Angelo to be a top guy that you would put in that spot specifically for the Heat Wave show. Now, speaking of the Heat Wave show, we found out that show is going to be the exact same day as Forbidden Door. And that has led a lot of NXT versus AEW fighting all over again. Ricochet is on Twitter calling it a bitch move. Meltzer was on his show disrespecting the Great American Bash. You know, nobody talks about the first fucking 4 hours of All In. You know, only 2.5 of which was covered by NXT, but almost nobody talks about those first 3 or 4 matches on AEW. But he was trashing that show, even though the cage match guys apparently really liked Great American Bash. I don't know, I don't care, but last I checked, it had a pretty high rating, I guess. But now Heatwave is going to run neck and neck with Forbidden Door. Everybody's upset about this. I really don't care. Again, Forbidden Door is going to be 9 hours because that's what AEW does. They figured it's going to go long, you know. But if NXT wants to compete head to head with AEW, they do need to put on better matches. And that was one of the things that I said about Great American Bash, is that it was a weak card. It was a very weak card. Now, it ended up turning out being pretty good when you watched it because the talent worked very hard. But the card was indeed weak, especially in the build. Hopefully Heatwave won't have that same problem. Hopefully they smarten up and they pick a bigger marquee match at the top, because at that point they'll have a dual champion, because they'll have a dual women's champion, whether it's a TNA champion or a WWE champion. Maybe they could build something out of that, and maybe they'll still have the TNA championship to work with, and who knows what they might spin out of all of these other strings that NXT is a hub for. And so I'm interested in what they plan to do to counter program Forbidden Door. And I'm thinking it's going to be their own little Forbidden Door. So there was a internet rumor, let's say, that Los Toxicas, which is Lady Maravilla, La Hydra, and Flammer from AAA, are going to be featured on WWE, which is more likely to be NXT if they're going to be featured on anything. And that ought to be fun, because around that time it should be, time to do another AAA crossover. And they are doing AAA crossovers as well, because Lola Vice has been sent to Mexico, and she's going to be a regular, I guess, working in AAA. And so that's going to be very interesting. And they've been, of course, a lot of talk about Mr. Iguana and Psycho Clown and all those guys coming to NXT. So that might be the plan, is they might do another sort of Worlds Collide gimmick, where it's another AAA versus NXT sort of thing. And that might be cool to sort of copy AEW with their own Forbidden Door show. They can counter it by having, Pro Wrestling Noah, which of course Yoshiki Inamura is from AAA, because they have their own championships as well. And of course, you could always have El Hijo del Vikingo, or those kind of guys pop up here. You might even get the Rey de Reinas, which is the AAA Women's Championship. I think it's Flammer who is the champion, who is a member of Los Toxicas. Maybe you try to do a belt collector gimmick in WWE, where whoever is the double champion walking out of Slammiversary, they challenge her, and maybe she gets to defend that joint at Heatwave. That sounds like it could be fun. Go ahead and copy the idea. It's ridiculous anyway, but unlike that product, this is all interconnected already. Now they haven't done a whole lot when it comes to AAA and NXT. They haven't done as much as I thought they would, but there's still a lot of opportunities there for them to do crossovers between AAA and NXT. And that ought to be fun to see what they're going to do to counter program Forbidden Door. I don't want to get my hopes up too high, but I'm getting my hopes up pretty high, So let me know what you guys think. Do you think it's too much? Is it too much to follow with, the LFG stuff and the Evolve stuff and the TNA stuff? Is it too much, or are you cool with it right now? Because for some people it's too much, and I get it. I think this particular show was sacrificed, as they wanted to focus on other shows. But overall, I think NXT has a pretty good handle on how to boost their own stars while also doing crossovers and leaving space for other shows to push other stars. So for right now, I think NXT is still the strong show that it normally is. It's just not 100% piff like it used to be. It's still one of those anything can happen products, and wild shit can occur on NXT. And I'm all about wild shit occurring in wrestling. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
No one does it better.